The most dangerous conversation in history took place in a garden. You probably know how it ends. The fruit is eaten. The world changes. Everything after, every war, every grave, every moment a human being has looked into the dark and wondered if they are alone, everything traces back to this one exchange. But here's what almost nobody does. Nobody reads it slowly. The serpent speaks 4 sentences in Genesis chapter 3. 4. Most people summarize them in a breath and move on to the consequences. But those 4 sentences are the most precisely engineered piece of rhetoric in the ancient world. Every word is placed, every move is deliberate, and when you slow down and look at what was actually said, not what you remember being told, not what Milton put in the serpent's mouth in Paradise Lost, but what the text actually says, something deeply unsettling rises to the surface. The serpent told one lie in this conversation. Just one. Everything else he said was true. We will come back to that. This is not a story about a snake. This is not a story about fruit. This is not a story about a rule that got broken. This is a story about the most sophisticated manipulation in recorded literature, and the reason it worked then is the same reason it still works now. Let's read every word. To understand what the serpent said, you have to understand where you are. The garden has no name for pain yet, no word for grave. The 2 people living inside it have never experienced the absence of something they needed. They have never gone to bed hungry, never lain awake wondering if they are loved. The world they inhabit is so complete, so unbroken, that the text can describe the whole of their existence in a single sentence. They were naked, and they were not ashamed. Hold that image, because everything the serpent says will be aimed directly at it. Now, who is the serpent? This is where most retellings skip something important. The Hebrew word is nachash, and nachash is strange. Yes, it can mean serpent, but the same root gives you nishush, divination, the reading of omens. Some scholars connect it to nahash, meaning shining, gleaming, bronze. The text never says devil, never says Satan. That identification comes much later, from the book of Revelation, from Jewish writings between the Old and New Testaments, from centuries of theological layering on top of a story that in its original form simply says, there was a Nahash in the garden. It was more cunning than any other creature, and it spoke. The Jewish historian Josephus, writing in the 1st century, called it the most cunning of all beasts, and said it persuaded the woman with what he called pithanologiae, persuasive but deceptive reasoning. Not force, not fear, persuasion. That word matters, because what follows is not an attack, it is a conversation. Now, the woman, her name, as most people know it, is Eve, but she does not have that name yet, not in this moment. The name Hawa, meaning mother of all living, will be given to her after the fall by the man standing beside her. In this scene, she is simply the woman, intelligent, attentive, fully capable of reasoning and responding. The text does not describe her as naive. It describes her as engaged. And the man, Adam, is there too. Genesis chapter 3, verse 6 will tell you plainly that he was with her. He hears every word the serpent speaks. He watches everything that follows. He says nothing. Theologians have argued about Adam's silence for 2,000 years. We will not resolve it today. But notice it, because the most consequential conversation in human history happens with one of its 2 main characters standing completely mute. Now, the serpent opens its mouth, and the first thing it does is not what you expect. The first thing the serpent says is not a statement, it is a question. Did God actually say, "You shall not eat of any tree in the garden"? Read that slowly, because buried inside what sounds like a simple request for clarification is one of the most precise rhetorical weapons ever constructed. To see it, you have to go back to the Hebrew. The sentence opens with 2 words, af ki. Most English translations render this as, "Did God really say?" or "Has God indeed said?" But af ki is not a genuine question. It is a particle of incredulity. The closest English equivalent is something like, "Surely not. Can it actually be true that?" It carries a tone, a raised eyebrow, a slight curl at the corner of the mouth. The serpent is not asking because it does not know the answer. It is asking because the question itself, delivered in exactly this tone, does something to the listener before a single word of response is given. It makes God's instruction sound unlikely, not wrong, not evil, just unlikely. The kind of thing you would double check, the kind of thing that now that someone has raised it, you realize you have never quite examined as carefully as perhaps you should. Here's what most people miss. The serpent also changes a word. God said in Genesis chapter 2, verse 17, "You shall not eat of the tree," one tree, a specific tree. The serpent says, "You shall not eat of any tree in the garden," every tree. The serpent takes a single prohibition and expands it to cover the whole garden, making God sound not like a father setting one boundary, but like a warden locking every door. It is a one-word edit, and it reframes everything. Now watch what the woman does. She corrects him. She is sharp. She pushes back immediately, telling the serpent that no, they may eat from the trees of the garden. Only the tree in the middle is forbidden. She has the facts. She knows what God said. But pay attention to what she adds. God's original command in Genesis chapter 2 was this: "Do not eat from the tree." That was the instruction. The woman quotes it back as, "Do not eat from the tree and do not touch it. Do not touch it." That phrase is not in God's original words anywhere in the text. She has added a rule, a buffer, a fence around the fence. Where did it come from? The text does not say. Maybe Adam told her. Maybe she reasoned it herself. If I don't touch it, I can't eat it. Maybe the serpent's question has already begun doing its work, and somewhere between hearing the question and forming her answer, the prohibition has grown slightly larger in her mind than it was when God first gave it. Irenaeus of Lyon, writing in the 2nd century, studied this exchange in his great work Against Heresies. He identified the serpent's first move as the foundation of every manipulation he had ever observed. Make the person question what they heard before you question what it means. Do not attack the command. Attack the memory of the command. Because once someone is uncertain whether they heard correctly, they are far less certain about what they heard. The serpent does not argue with Eve's correction. It does not point out that she added a rule. It simply receives her answer and moves to its second sentence, because the question has done its job. The doubt has been planted. Not a big doubt. Not a crisis of faith. Just a hairline fracture in certainty. The faint, almost imperceptible sense that the ground underfoot is perhaps not quite as solid as it was 5 minutes ago. That is all the serpent needed. The serpent's second sentence is the shortest in the conversation. It is also the only outright lie. You will not surely die. 3 words in Hebrew, lo tamutun, 3 words to cancel the most emphatic warning God had given. And to understand how devastating that cancellation is, you have to go back to what God actually said in Genesis chapter 2. God's warning was mot tamut, dying, you shall die. In biblical Hebrew, when you want to stress something beyond all doubt, you repeat the root of the verb before the verb itself. It is called the infinitive absolute, and it is the grammatical equivalent of underlining a sentence, circling it, and putting 3 exclamation marks beside it. The rabbis called this construction the strongest possible form of certainty in the Hebrew language. God did not say, "You might die." God did not say there will be consequences. God said, with maximum grammatical weight, with every emphasis the language could carry, "Dying, you shall die." The serpent hears that and responds with 3 flat words. Lo tamutun, you will not die. No argument, no evidence, no counter-reasoning, just a direct, calm, almost bored contradiction of the most emphatic statement in the text. And this is the part that should stop you, because it works. Not immediately, not as a sudden conversion, but the woman does not walk away. She stays, she keeps listening. Which means the flat contradiction, delivered after the question has already done its softening work, lands somewhere inside her as at least possible. But it gets stranger. Notice what the serpent does not say. It does not say God was wrong. It does not say God lied to you. It does not accuse. It simply states the opposite of what God said. And then, in its very next breath, offers an explanation for why God said what God said. That sequence is precise. Doubt the instruction, deny the consequence, then explain the motive. 3 moves, each one building on the last. Irenaeus saw this clearly. He wrote that the serpent's method was not chaos, but architecture. Every word was placed to prepare for the next. The question loosened the ground. The denial removed the warning. And now, with the ground loose and the warning gone, the serpent was ready to do something far more dangerous than lie. It was ready to tell the truth. Adam is still there, still silent. The text has not moved him. He stands beside the woman while the serpent dismantles the only prohibition God gave them, and he offers nothing, no correction, no question, no hand on her arm. Later, when God asks him directly what happened, Adam will say, "The woman you gave me, she gave me the fruit, and I ate." He will name her before he names himself. But right now, in this moment, before the eating, before the naming, before the blame, he is simply present, watching, saying nothing. Some theologians read his silence as passivity, a failure of the protection he was meant to offer. Others read it as complicity. He heard every word and made a choice with his silence. Others still say the text is simply being honest about something that happens in every human relationship. Sometimes the person standing next to you during the most important conversation of your life is somewhere else entirely in their mind. The text does not judge him here. It simply notes that he was there. And the serpent moves to its third sentence. The serpent's third sentence is the longest. It is also the most theologically uncomfortable thing in the entire chapter, because it is true. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Read that again, slowly. The serpent is not promising something false. It is not dangling an illusion. Every claim in that sentence will be confirmed by God himself before the chapter ends. And that confirmation is the detail that most Sunday school lessons quietly skip past, because it raises a question nobody quite wants to answer out loud. If the serpent was telling the truth, what exactly did it lie about? Here's the part nobody tells you. The word translated knowing in this sentence is the Hebrew yada. And yada is not the word you use for academic knowledge. It is not the word for information or understanding or intellectual comprehension. Yada is the word used in Genesis chapter 4, verse 1, when the text says Adam knew his wife Eve and she conceived. It is the word for intimate, embodied, irreversible experience. The kind of knowing that changes you permanently, the kind you cannot unknow. The serpent is not promising Eve a piece of information she is missing. It is promising her a transformation, an expansion of being so total that she will never be the same creature afterward. And here is the architecture of the lie, the real lie, the one underneath the only sentence that was factually false. The serpent told the truth about what would happen. It lied about what that truth would cost. It told her she would become like God. It did not tell her she would also become like someone who knows what it feels like to be ashamed, to hide, to cover yourself with fig leaves in a garden where yesterday you needed nothing. The serpent offered the sunrise and left out the fact that you would have to live through the night to get there. Philo of Alexandria, the Jewish philosopher writing in the decades before and after the birth of Jesus, read this entire scene differently from most of his contemporaries. For Philo, the serpent was not an external creature at all. It was epithumia, desire, the appetite faculty of the human mind itself. The conversation in Genesis 3 in his reading is not a dialogue between a woman and a talking animal. It is the interior monologue of every human being who has ever stood before something they want and begun to reason their way toward taking it. That reading is 2,000 years old, and it has never entirely gone away, because you know this voice. You have heard it, not in a garden. In a quiet moment when something you wanted was close enough to touch, and your mind began, very gently, very reasonably, to explain why the thing keeping you from it was perhaps not as solid as you once thought. The voice does not usually sound like temptation. It sounds like clarity. It sounds like finally seeing something you should have seen all along. It sounds, if you are not paying close attention, almost exactly like wisdom. The woman looks at the tree. Genesis chapter 3, verse 6 gives you 4 verbs in 4 words. She saw, she desired, she took, she gave. 4 verbs. The whole of the fall fits inside them. She saw that the tree was good for food, her body. She saw that it was a delight to the eyes, her senses. She saw that it was desirable to make one wise, her mind. Body, senses, mind. The serpent's 3 sentences have moved through all 3 of them, and now all 3 are in agreement. She takes the fruit. She eats. She gives some to her husband, who is with her. And he eats. No conversation recorded for Adam. No serpent required. No question, no denial, no truth wrapped around a lie. Just his wife hands him the fruit, and he eats. 4 chapters of theological debate in a single verse, and the text dispenses with Adam's fall in one clause. He was there the whole time, heard everything, and when the moment came, he needed no persuading at all. And then God speaks, not to the serpent, not yet. First, God walks in the garden in the cool of the day. The Hebrew is ruach hayom, the breath of the day, the wind of the late afternoon, and the man and the woman hear the sound of him coming. And they hide. This is the first hiding in human history. The first instinct after the knowing is not joy, not the triumphant expansion of being that the serpent promised. It is the need to disappear, to get behind something, to put distance between yourself and the one whose voice you have always, until this moment, had no reason to fear. God calls out, "Where are you?" Theologians have debated for centuries whether God knew where they were. Most conclude that he did. The question was not a request for coordinates. It was an invitation, the first act of grace in the Bible, depending on how you read it. Come out, tell me what happened. Let me hear it from you. Adam answers from behind the trees. He says he was afraid because he was naked, so he hid. And God asks the question that will echo through every courtroom and every confession and every difficult conversation in the history of the human race. Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree? What follows is not pretty. Adam names the woman before he names himself. The woman names the serpent. The serpent, notably, is not asked. It receives its judgment without the courtesy of a question. But before the judgment, before the curses, before the expulsion, before the angel with the flaming sword is stationed at the gate, God says something that should stop every reader cold. Behold, the man has become like one of us in knowing good and evil. There it is. We planted this at the beginning of this video. The serpent told one lie in this conversation. Just one. And here, in God's own words, is the confirmation that everything else the serpent said was accurate. The eyes were opened. They did become like God in knowing good and evil. The yada happened. The transformation was real. The serpent did not win with a lie. It won with a truth. One truth, wrapped around one lie, aimed with precision at the one vulnerability that has never changed in any human being across any century, in any culture, on any continent. The suspicion that someone with power over you is withholding something from you for their own benefit rather than yours. He did not tempt her with evil. He did not tempt her with chaos. He did not tempt her with destruction. He tempted her with a version of the truth, partial, precise, devastating, and he let her own reasoning do the rest. Stay with me, because this is where it lands. You have met this conversation before, not in a garden, maybe in a relationship where someone you trusted began very gently to ask questions about people in your life. Not accusations, questions. Did your friend really say that? Are you sure that's what your mother meant? Is it possible that what you heard isn't exactly what was said? Small questions, reasonable questions, questions that, one by one, loosened the ground beneath relationships you had never thought to doubt. Or maybe it was inside your own mind. The quiet internal voice that does not tell you to do the wrong thing outright. It would never be so obvious. But instead asks whether the right thing is really as right as you always assumed. Whether the boundary you set is perhaps a little rigid. Whether the person who warned you had motives you should probably consider. Therapists have a name for this method. They call it cognitive reframing through strategic doubt. It is studied in the context of coercive control, cult recruitment, and the early stages of manipulation in intimate relationships. The pattern is consistent across every context researchers have examined. It always begins with a question. The question is always reasonable. The question is always aimed at something the target believes with confidence. And the question never asks for agreement. It only asks for a moment of uncertainty. A moment is enough. Irenaeus wrote in the 2nd century that the serpent's method was not a new invention. He said it was the ancient pattern, older than any heresy, older than any theology. The pattern of every voice that has ever tried to place itself between a person and the one they trust most. First, make them doubt what they heard, then deny the consequence, then reframe the motive of the one who warned them. 3 moves. In that order. Every time. The garden is gone. The serpent is not. So what do you do with this? 3 things. And the third one matters most. The first is this. The serpent's power was never supernatural. It was editorial. It changed one word, any for the It dropped one warning, it reframed one motive. That was the entire arsenal. No fire, no force, no overwhelming display of evil that left its target with no choice. Just language, used with surgical precision by something that understood exactly how a mind moves from certainty to doubt to decision. The most consequential act of destruction in the biblical narrative was accomplished with a vocabulary of perhaps 50 words. That should permanently change how seriously you take the words being spoken into your life and the words you speak into others. The second is this: every lie you have ever believed, the ones that cost you something real, the ones that took years to name, the ones that reshaped how you saw yourself or God or the people closest to you, almost certainly did not begin with a statement. It began with a question, a reasonable question, a question that felt in the moment like clarity. The serpent's method is not ancient history. It did not retire when the garden closed. It adapted. It is fluent in every language, comfortable in every century, and it has never once needed to update its three-step structure because the structure works on every generation of the same creature. You, the one it was designed for. And the third thing, the one I want you to sit with. The serpent was not wrong about what would happen. The eyes were opened. The knowing came. God confirmed it himself. What the serpent withheld was not the destination. It was the cost of the road. It told the truth about where eating would take them and said nothing about what they would feel when they arrived. The shame, the hiding, the sudden terrible awareness of being exposed in a garden where yesterday they had been completely, effortlessly, unself-consciously at home. This is what makes Genesis 3 unlike any other temptation story in any literature. The tempter does not promise something false. It promises something real and bets everything on the calculation that you will not ask about the cost until it is already paid. And it was right. The question for you, the one I genuinely want you to think about and tell me in the comments below, is this: which of the serpent's three moves do you think is the most dangerous? The question that introduced doubt? The lie that canceled the warning? Or the truth that made the lie believable? Because people answer that differently. And the answer you give probably says something true about where you are most vulnerable. The conversation in Genesis 3 is still happening. The words have not changed. The moves have not changed. The vulnerability has not changed. Only the garden has. And somewhere, right now, in the life of someone watching this, maybe a voice is asking a question, a reasonable question, a question aimed at something you have always believed with confidence. Pay attention to what it is aimed at. That is where it matters most.